fine reporters over at The Hill published a laughable and embarrassing piece about Joe Manchin's alleged bromance with Joe Biden. Now, I don't deny that they probably have a friendly relationship. It's just some of the framing in this piece that I have an issue with and I want to bring to your attention. So the title is Inside the Surprisingly Close Biden-Manchin Relationship. And one of the first paragraphs argues that Manchin has always seen himself in the Biden mold, someone who's willing to cross party lines to find a compromise. They share the same first name. Wow. And working class roots, as well as a willingness to work together on heated issues, including gun reform. Now, let me be clear. But Manchin is not willing to work with Biden on gun reform. Manchin doesn't even want to do away with some of the federal background check loopholes. Essentially, he wants to protect the ability for private sellers to sell to one another without background checks. So I don't know where that framing comes from. But John, I mean, who cares? They share the first name, and so that's all that matters.
They do. We double checked to make sure, but yeah, like he's willing to work on gun reform. What is he willing in the future to pose with fewer guns in his campaign advertisements? He pitches himself as basically a Republican on guns. Look, in this story, substantively, which I'm sure we're gonna get to in many different ways, Joe Biden and Joe Manchin are the bad guys. With that particular thing though, it's the writers. Why did they write that? Why did the editor allow it? Yes, their name is the same. We understand that their name is the same. That doesn't mean anything. We're not children.
But believe it or not, I mean, look, you and John Boehner, you guys really get along because you guys share a first name. And so as a result, you guys are buddies. You guys are willing to work together on gun control just because of that.
We both hate Ted Cruz. We have that in common, but that's about it. We both drink, I don't know, occasionally cry. Those are the three things that our bromance is resting on.
Okay, so look, believe it or not, that's actually the most benign part of the framing in this article. I want to go to the rest of it, which I do find a problem with. And it's not just The Hill that's using this framing. I'm seeing it all over the place and we need to correct it. So Manchin acknowledged that he and Biden, who are separated by 5 years in age, grew up in the same era of Democratic politics and both have looked out for the same predominantly unionized working class voters throughout their careers. Have they?
What was Joe Manchin's position on raising the minimum wage earlier this year?
And he thinks
that's on the authors again.
Is too much.
It's too much.
He's looking out for workers, but let's not pay them $15 an hour. And I also want to remind you all of who Joe Biden is, okay? Because there's no amount of positive PR or spin that can erase what his record was. So I want to start off with the first video. This was during the Democratic primaries in early 2020. Bernie Sanders did an interview to essentially call Joe Biden out on his record, and he's right about everything he lists here. Take a look.
Joe Biden voted and helped lead the effort for the war in Iraq, the most dangerous foreign policy blunder in the modern history of this country. Joe Biden voted for the disastrous trade agreements like NAFTA and permanent normal trade relations with China, which cost us millions of jobs. You think that's gonna play well in Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania? Joe Biden has been on the floor of the Senate talking about the need to cut Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid. Joe Biden pushed a bankruptcy bill, which has caused enormous financial problems for working families.
Yes, enormous problems for working families. Yes, the trade deals that we've made with China, the trade deals through NAFTA have shipped millions of jobs out of this country in the search for cheap labor to exploit. So he's right about that. I mean, I don't know how that really helps workers, much less unionized workers in America. I don't know, spoiler alert, it hasn't, it's been a disaster. But that framing just continues to live on in article after article, all due to Biden's willingness to spend a little more money than previous Democratic administrations.
A little more, yeah. And I'll never understand why, like Biden supposedly being so much better for workers than, I don't know, Lieberman, I guess. Blanche Lincoln, that's enough. He did one or two things or whatever. So now that makes him special. Look at that. He's got workers' backs. Okay, well, what about politicians that like have their backs more? Nope, extreme, don't like it. Suspicious. I don't like that at all. Why is that not a net good to be even more supportive? And not just decades ago, but like actually right now. I don't understand that. It's like they like a little bit of flavor on their politicians, but like let's not get crazy and like really start actually spending money on these people. Basically it's just speeches, or that he rides the train. They like the performative stuff a little bit, but they don't want anything large that's gonna be expensive. And we're actually seeing that play out in the approach to things like the $15 minimum wage, which is fine if you're gonna like that sort of thing, but don't write an article about how they have this romance that will survive, the sun exploding into a red giant, and make it about how they share this love for the working class, when not just the past few decades, but indeed just the past month or two proves that there is only so far that will go, and it's really not that far from the point of view of the working class. How about when you're gonna write something about how they're great champions for the working class, you ask the working class whether that's true. You ask workers, maybe go down to Bessemer, ask them who their champions are amongst politicians. But no, it's some disconnected writers talking about disconnected politicians that haven't existed in that world for literally decades, outside of the occasional train ride.
So Manchin continues, right? So Manchin wants to draw this similarity between Biden and FDR, which, to be fair to Manchin, he's not the only one doing that. So The Hill writes, Manchin says he speaks regularly with Biden. He estimated he's spoken to Biden 5 or 7 times since he became president, and expects to be invited to the White House soon to discuss infrastructure. And then this is his direct quote. Next to FDR, this person, meaning Biden, understands this process as well, if not better than anyone I know. And so like the FDR conclusions that people have, just because Biden's willing to spend a little bit more money is what's driving me crazy. Because as we've talked about on this show before, the big difference between Biden's infrastructure proposal and what FDR did is FDR actually made systemic changes. He had actual permanent programs that benefited the lives of so many workers. We haven't seen that from Biden yet. An upcoming proposal might make the child tax credits permanent, but even so, it's not a universal program that would, obviously benefit the lives of people who don't have kids. Like what kind of permanent programs are being proposed for people who don't have children, right? And that's not to say I don't want the child tax credit. I think that it's a fantastic provision and should be made permanent. I'm just saying that even if that passes, you still can't get close to what FDR was willing to do and succeeded in doing through the New Deal. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, and his bill, I mean, it's difficult to do one-to-one comparisons, but it's at least like 5 times smaller than the New Deal, possibly even more so. So I feel like that's worth taking into account. Yeah, it's frustrating to hear the comparisons without them yet being earned is frustrating. Anytime you hear about how much he wants to be like FDR, it's like a person who's like planning to go to the gym talking about how much like Hercules they are. Like, but shouldn't you do it first before you start taking the accolades? And then, but this is even worse. This is like if that guy has a friend who's trying to stop him from going to the gym, being like, he's basically Hercules already. He doesn't even need to do this stuff. Like, you know what you want that meeting for. I don't even know why didn't you go with the Republicans? It's the same meeting. Don't tax the rich, don't do as much. That's all it's gonna be. Yep. It's gonna be, let's really narrow it. So the government doesn't do much for people, but okay, so that's a negative, I get it. But then what we get out of that is the rich don't have to give. That's all the conversation is going to be. And he's going to try to limit as much as possible. I'm sure he's gonna talk about infrastructure is just asphalt. I'm sure that is going to be his contribution to the political conversation. We don't need him. We don't need him. He is powerful because he can derail the entire thing. Okay, he can hold us hostage. That's how the media needs to be covering this. This is not a buddy comedy. Okay, he's the guy standing, and maybe Sinema, and maybe some cowardly Democrats who won't even like Manchin and Sinema identify yet how awful they are. He's the one standing between us and relief. That's it. That's the only thing that the Hill and Politico should be saying about it. Of course, they're not going to.
Right. In fact, there's a very clear double standard in the way that they're willing to cover someone like Joe Manchin, who serves as an obstacle to passing even Joe Biden's agenda, and certainly has no interest in helping to pass any type of progressive agenda. But when you see progressives try to fight corporate Democrats, the headlines are very different. The framing in these articles, and this isn't even an opinion piece. This is supposed to be straight news reporting, which is hilarious to me. But the framing of it is very different if you have progressives who are willing to withhold their vote as a block in order to ensure that they get some of their favored provisions in the legislation in these must-pass bills. And also, I mean, we had a lengthy discussion about how progressives shouldn't be afraid to use that leverage, and unfortunately they haven't been. But I do want to leave you with this one final part of the article that I thought was interesting, because Democratic strategists are a big part of what pulls lawmakers, Democratic lawmakers, further to the right. And this is a clear example of that. So Democratic strategist and Capitol Hill veteran Jim Manley said it's smart for Biden and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, to give some room for the two to maneuver, meaning Joe Manchin and Joe Biden. The last thing they should be doing is overreacting to the demands of activists. And to be clear, they don't. They don't overreact to the demands of activists. They barely react to the demands of activists. In fact, Joe Manchin is downright combative when it comes to these demands. And Joe Biden, he'll start off by saying, like, I want to bring the country together. I want to work together. Sure, I'm open to all ideas. And he might come out with something that seems okay, certainly not as robust as we would like to see. But all it takes is a few meetings with bipartisan lawmakers, a meeting with the Chamber of Commerce, and all of a sudden we're talking about a bill that is stripped of its progressive provisions, and a bill that shifts the costs from, honestly, millionaires and billionaires, corporations, to people like the two of us, people watching the show, in the form of regressive taxes like a gas tax or a tax on electric vehicles. It's just, that's the way it works. That's the way it works. It's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, and if really, sorry, I'll keep it fast. If they're gonna have this little supposed battle where we're supposed to believe that Biden is secretly fighting to be FDR 2.0, and like, oh, he's really gonna deal with Manchin, but don't worry, just hang in there. I think that we would be able to have a little bit more faith if simultaneously Biden was actually doing some of the things he can do independently in that area, okay? It would be a little bit easier to say, no, he's definitely gonna get that $15 an hour minimum wage. He's a fighter if today he signed student loan debt cancellation. Like if he did that, if he, I don't know, this is a far lower bar, but if he actually raised the cap on refugees coming in, if he were doing these things that he can do, that Joe Manchin, it doesn't matter what Joe Manchin thinks about it, that would at least show he's willing to act. But when you're just getting engaged in these back and forths with Joe Manchin and you're not doing the independent stuff, why would we have faith?
Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.